Poor bloody infantry have always had the worst of any war. They're the men who've got to take the ground and hold it. There isn't a substitute, but the carnage of the First World War showed that there had to be a better way of using those men, rather than being simple cannon fodder. They had to be found a way of accomplishing their mission without such enormous waste. The Japanese, with no scruples about individual life, weren't concerned about their own or anyone else's when they began mobilizing for war in the late 1920s. On an overpopulated island, manpower was cheap, and the warrior code of Bushido spurred the infantry on to a decade of empire-building infamy. First came the invasion of Manchuria in 1931, which many people regard as the real beginning of World War II. This was a conflict between foot-slocking infantry and horse-drawn artillery in 18th or 19th century style, with no concessions to technological advances. It only ended when the Russians kicked the Japanese out in 1945. Before this, though, in 1937, Japan had also attacked China. The Chinese infantry, under the warlord Chiang Kai-shek, fought back vigorously, but they were badly trained and lacked modern equipment until help came from the United States in 1942 following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. This eventually turned the tables, but left China in a state of civil war, resulting in an eventual communist victory for Mao Zedong. Witnessing these battles from afar in the early 1930s, planners in many industrial Western countries were turning their thoughts towards making the infantry a more effective weapon, faster moving and with more chance of survival. The little Carden-Lloyd Carrier was a hesitant step in the right direction by the British government, which was also adopted by the Italians as the CV29. They could only carry a couple of men plus a machine gun and would have sunk without trace in the mud of Flanders, but they were a small step in the right direction towards giving infantry a degree of armoured protection as well as increased mobility. The Italians and the French went another step further by hitching a trailer to the back as a carrier for ammunition and other stores, and vehicles of this type served on well past their sell-by dates. The year 1940 saw the advent of a new style of warfare called blitzkrieg or lightning war, and a triumphant German army marching through the streets of Paris. The whole concept of blitzkrieg relied on close cooperation between tanks and infantry, so the men of the panzer divisions enjoyed the luxury of riding into battle in armoured half-tracks, tracked vehicles with a pair of ordinary rubber-tired steering wheels at the front. These helped them reap the benefits of one victory. And to begin with, when Adolf Hitler invaded Russia in 1941, it looked as though another quick result was on the cards. One of the most important German developments to help the infantry accomplish their mission successfully was the Hanomag Armoured Personnel Carrier, or APC. This was a far cry from the tiny Carden-Lloyd carriers, and is the real forerunner of all modern armoured personnel carriers, being the first to enter mass production, and with over 16,000 being made. The German armoured infantry, or Panzer Grenadiers, enjoyed the protection of armour up to nearly half an inch thick, which would shield them from machine gun fire and shrapnel on their way to the front line. The vehicle had two real drawbacks. It did not have all-armoured roof, so the occupants were vulnerable to air bursts or mortar fire. And, because its engine was literally squeezed into the armoured nose, maintenance was extremely difficult. What the Hanomag did have was the capability to carry 10 infantrymen and 1 or 2 machine guns into action across most types of terrain at 30 miles per hour. This was a revolution in warfare which has largely gone unrecognised, because the tanks take all the glory. And that, as they say, isn't all. The Hanomag had double doors at the rear, so that the infantry could debus and go to ground quickly when under fire. This is a feature which has been copied in most post-war vehicles. They could also use the shoulder-high walls of the Hanomag as firing rests for their rifles from comparative safety. The fully enclosed APC with firing ports still lay in the future, but the Hanomag was a great advance over anything which had preceded it. It gave the infantry greater mobility and flexibility than they had ever enjoyed, and the discomfort of being battered around inside a tin can was better than walking. At the end of the day, though, the infantry still had to dismount, particularly when fighting in towns and cities. The Hanomag did have other drawbacks which didn't emerge until the German army encountered the rigours of the Russian winter. Only the driver and co-driver enjoyed any warmth from the engine. The rest of the men froze because the vehicle's interior was colder than a trench or foxhole in the snow, for the simple reason that steel conducts heat quicker than mud does. Anyone who has been trapped in a car in a snowstorm can tell you the same. On top of that, if you don't wear gloves, in the sub-zero temperatures of the Russian winter, that same steel will literally burn the skin off your hands. The Hanomag's tracks were also too narrow to give good traction in soft snow, which limited the vehicle's mission performance in support of a tank attack. Even though the infantry had to deploy in conventional manner during operations such as the Siege of Tobruk, Hanomags and the smaller 6-ton D-Mag helped Rommel's Afrika Korps win some of their most famous victories between 1941 and 1942. Although soft sand was as big an obstacle as snow, much of the western desert is gravel or shale, and the half-tracks were able to sustain high speeds in the pursuit of the British back to Tobruk and ultimately to Alamein. The biggest problems the armoured infantry found in the desert, apart from the enemy, were the dust, which got into everything, causing engines to overheat, and constant fuel shortages because of Allied attacks on supply convoys. The same problems also affected other vehicles, of course. Unarmoured half-track prime movers were widely used to tow the artillery, allowing Rommel to deploy his forces rapidly. He also made very effective use of the 88mm flak gun in the anti-tank role, a trick he had learned in France. The British, meanwhile, had continued development of the Carden-Lloyd design, and from 1938 onwards the half-ton universal carrier began entering service at the rate of 10 for each infantry battalion. Each could carry a section of 6 men, as well as a Bren light machine gun in the hull front. The early concept of also using the carrier in mass formations to charge into action old-fashioned cavalry style was soon abandoned. Their chances of survival, deployed like this on a World War II battlefield, would have been very slim indeed. Nevertheless, carriers served on as armoured personnel carriers through 1945. Their main drawback, just like the German Hanomag, was the lack of overhead protection, on top of which the occupants had to expose themselves to enemy fire when jumping out. One totally unsuccessful British experiment, which was rapidly abandoned, was towing armoured sleds behind tanks, each sled carrying 10 or a dozen men. However, the concept was developed for other purposes. One of the most successful of these was the Churchill Crocodile, a flame-throwing tank which carried the fuel for the flame gun in a trailer. The infantry followed in convoy behind the tanks in their universal carriers. A very different vehicle which was developed for operations against the Japanese in the island-hopping Pacific campaign was the Alligator. This fully tracked, amphibious vehicle was originally a civilian design intended to rescue the survivors of plane crashes in the Florida Everglades, hence the original name of Alligator. When it was featured in a magazine article in 1940, The United States Marine Corps showed immediate interest, placing an initial order for 300. The original idea was that they should be used as supply vehicles to support landings after a beachhead had been secured, so they were unarmoured. But it didn't take long to realise their potential as troop carriers, though, and later versions were lightly armoured against machine gun fire and shell splinters. They were popularly known as water buffaloes, although the correct name was LVTA for Landing Vehicle Tracked Armoured. They were produced in several variants, one mounting a light tank turret and others having hinged ramps at the rear, allowing them to carry a jeep or up to 30 infantry at 7 miles per hour in the water or 20 miles per hour over land. Water buffaloes were used effectively throughout the campaign to liberate the Marshall and Gilbert Islands, the Philippines and the Marianas. Then in February 1945 came the Marine Corps' sternest test on Iwo Jima. This tiny island was fanatically defended because of its strategic importance, lying only 600 miles from the Japanese mainland. From Iwo Jima's 2 airfields, Allied fighters could fly escort for the B-29 bombers, which were suffering heavy losses in raids on Japanese cities. To ensure the island's capture, Admiral Chester Nimitz ordered in the veteran 5th Marine Corps. The 8 assault battalions of the 4th and 5th Divisions embarked in their landing craft 4,000 yards offshore and drove up to the beaches in 10 waves. Nearly 500 water buffaloes were deployed, driving the Marines straight inland up the steeply shelving beaches. For the first 20 minutes, there was no sign of Japanese resistance, and the Marines quickly drove 200 or 300 yards inshore. Then all hell broke loose. The Japanese had dug miles of tunnels with carefully concealed exits. Now they started firing from behind the Marines, while artillery pounded the shoreline. It was a clever trick, and the battle would ultimately cost over 6,000 American lives. But the Japanese had made the fatal mistake of allowing the Marines to get ashore in strength before counterattacking. Within an hour and a half, all 8 assault battalions were ashore, and landing craft were beginning to bring in the tanks and other heavy equipment. On the left flank of the assault, the 5th Division had the hardest task because their beach was overlooked by Mount Suribashi. It took 3 days of hard fighting before the Marines were able to raise Old Glory on its summit. It took another 3 weeks to subdue the rest of the defences and reopen the airfields. Around the other side of the world, American armoured infantrymen had enjoyed the use of a totally different type of personnel carrier since first landing in French Northwest Africa in 1942. This was the 9-ton white M3 half-track, which could carry 12 infantry in addition to its driver and machine gunner. Although based on an existing truck, it imitated many features of the German Hanomag, including half-inch armour and rear doors to allow the infantry to deploy in relative safety. But it was still an open-topped vehicle with all the disadvantages which that implies. Nevertheless, it was very versatile, with good mobility, and by 1944, every American armoured infantry regiment was equipped with 150 M3s per battalion. Infantry mobility was one advantage the United States Army enjoyed throughout the war compared with any other nation. This gave them great flexibility in responding quickly to threats or exploiting breakthroughs, not giving the enemy a chance to draw breath. There were 3 armoured infantry regiments, 3 battalions of tanks, and 3 armoured field artillery battalions to a typical American armoured division. One of each was assigned to a brigade called a combat command, which was based on the German battle group system. This again gave much improved mission flexibility, even though a combat command on the march could stretch down 30 miles of road. In defence, each command would normally occupy a 2 or 3 mile front, although they were more tightly spaced for an attack. And attack has always been the best means of defence, as the Allies were proving in the Far East, with fighters and bombers from Iwo Jima and Okinawa pounding the Japanese mainland mercilessly through 1945. Losses on the ground during the long island-hopping campaign had been high, though, and the thought of an amphibious assault on Japan itself was daunting. To save further Allied casualties and make a swift end to the war, President Truman finally decided to deploy the ultimate weapon. Atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki finally forced the Japanese to capitulate in August. In the new nuclear age, the armoured infantry have finally got a wide selection of personnel carriers with much-needed overhead protection. One of the smallest, and intended mainly for internal security duties, is the Shorland S55. Based on the 4x4 Land Rover chassis, the armoured crew compartment contains many refinements which have been the envy of earlier infantry. Driver and co-driver sit at the front, and 6 infantry on the bench seats at the rear. The vehicle has air conditioning, internal lighting, seat belts, and a grab rail in the roof which the men can hang on to before making a quick exit as soon as the Shorland comes to a halt. In addition, each infantryman has a firing port through which he can use his individual weapon. These can be snapped shut in a second if someone starts throwing petrol bombs. Like all Land Rovers, the Shorland has excellent mobility both on and off the road, with a top speed of 75 miles per hour. This means it can be deployed very rapidly from one trouble spot to another, or use its high power to weight ratio to get itself out of difficulties. Armour protection is only 1/4 of an inch thick, so the Shorland is clearly not intended for missions in a real shooting war. Most modern military rifles, let alone machine guns, could penetrate it easily, but it is impervious to bricks and the other missiles usually encountered during civil disturbances. The Shorland's cross-country mobility is a vital feature for patrolling border areas, pursuing suspects, or escorting other vehicles through hostile countryside. This has won the vehicle many export orders outside Britain and Ireland to countries where internal security is a problem. Another post-war vehicle which has enjoyed outstanding export success is the Piranha Armoured Personnel Carrier. This has been developed since the 1970s by the Swiss Moag company to meet a variety of mission profiles and is available in 4, 6 and 8-wheeled versions. Such is its versatility that it has even been adopted by the United States Army and Marine Corps. The Piranha can carry up to 15 men who dismount through the rear door. With well-sloped armour nearly 1/2 inch thick, a top speed of over 60 miles per hour, good cross-country performance, and the ability to swim across rivers, it is a first-rate vehicle for the modern battlefield. The infantry have firing ports through which they can use their individual weapons. The Piranha can also be fitted with a variety of small turrets with remote-controlled machine guns or cannon to give covering fire while the infantry deploy. The main threat to world peace until recent years was always seen as the Soviet Union, with its overwhelming number of tanks, which NATO could only hope to beat through better technology, training and tactics. But the Russian army is not only one of the strongest in the world, but also one of the most experienced. It was the first to develop what is now known as a mechanized infantry combat vehicle. The BMP series has been progressively developed and modernized since the 1960s. Unlike the Piranha, it is fully tracked and has a small man turret which gives it some of the capability of a light tank. It is also fully amphibious because the Red Army knew that if it ever did invade Western Europe, it would have a lot of major rivers to cross. A great deal of thought went into the design of the BMP to allow it to perform a variety of missions, in addition to its basic one of putting its infantry in the right place and giving them some covering fire. The original BMP-1 carried a crew of 3 plus 8 infantrymen who exited through a large door at the rear. They also had firing ports in the hull sides through which they could aim their individual weapons. Later versions, the BMP-2 and 3, also have firing ports, but carry one man less because extra space has been taken up with new weapons fits and technological refinements. Both the hull and the turret have been extensively revised over the years, and the main armament has changed several times. The latest version carries a 100mm rifle gun with the unusual capability of also firing a laser-guided anti-tank missile. There is also a coaxial quick-firing 30mm cannon and a hull machine gun. This combination allows the BMP not only to bring its infantry forward in support of the main battle tanks, but also to fight off enemy tanks and infantry tank destroyer teams. Another Russian vehicle with similar characteristics is the BMD Armoured Combat Vehicle, designed specifically for airborne operations. The Russians have long appreciated the effectiveness of paratroops and were among the first in the world to develop this fighting arm back in the 1930s. The main weakness of airborne forces in general has always been that they are relatively lightly armed and unable to stand up against concentrated counterattacks by more conventional forces. The BMD section of 4 or 5 armoured infantry have the comfort of knowing that their vehicles are not only fully amphibious, but also have a useful 73 or 30mm gun in the turret and a launch rack for wire-guided anti-tank missiles. Riding side by side with the Red Army's tanks, the BMDs and Ps give Russian armoured infantry enormous mission flexibility. A West German design with similar capabilities, dating back to before the country's reunification, is the Marder. Although it is not amphibious and is no longer in production, the ability to carry a section of 6 infantry, as well as a 20mm gun and Milan anti-tank missiles, still makes it formidable. A private venture designed to replace the Marder is the Puma Infantry Combat Vehicle, which emerged in the late 1980s. Many armoured fighting vehicles have had their origins this way, being designed to catch the customer's eye rather than being built to a government specification. The Puma is very much a creature of the Millennium battlefield. Like the Russian BMP, it carries a crew of 3 and up to 8 fully equipped infantrymen with all their gear. The welded steel armour protects them against enemy weapons up to 30mm caliber, although this doesn't include the sort of high-velocity armour-piercing cannon fitted to most modern ground attack aircraft. In fact, no military vehicle since the 1940s has been tough enough to withstand air attack. The best that can be achieved is the usual compromise between armour protection, mobility and firepower. The primary mission of an armoured infantry combat vehicle is to get the troops into the front line as quick and safely as possible. With a top speed of 45 miles per hour and good cross-country performance in all types of terrain, the Puma is well equipped to accomplish this mission. It is not amphibious, although, like several other German vehicles, it does have a deep fording capability thanks to an overpressure air conditioning system. This also protects the occupants from nuclear, bacteriological and chemical hazards. Further crew safety is enhanced by an automatic fire extinguishing system which comes on more quickly than a human being could react if the vehicle is hit. On top of this, the small turret mounts 25mm quick-firing cannon to give the infantry covering fire while they deploy. Another new vehicle which only started entering service in 1993 is the Swedish Combat Vehicle 90 or CV90. Like the Puma, this was designed with survivability on the 21st century battlefield very much in mind, as well as the characteristics of the Scandinavian countryside and the need to operate in deep snow. A high power-to-weight ratio and good weight distribution through the wide tracks give the performance needed by the Swedish and Norwegian armies. In fact, there's a lot of truth in saying that the CV90 has been designed to boldly go where few other military vehicles could venture. Like the Puma, the CV90 has a crew of 3, 2 of them in the turret, and carries 8 infantrymen. One unusual feature is that instead of firing ports, the vehicle has roof hatches to allow the troops to use their individual weapons. These also give a means of exiting the vehicle, although the infantry would normally deploy out of the rear door. The CV90 has a very low silhouette and well-sloped frontal armour for both concealment and protection. A top speed of nearly 45 miles per hour also increases battlefield survivability. The CV90 is intended to operate in battle groups alongside the Swedish Army's S-tank and IKV-91 tank destroyer, which, between them, provide enormous mission flexibility in both attack and defence. Thought has also gone into defence against low-flying tank-busting helicopters. The Bofors 40mm cannon, fitted in the CV90's turret, can elevate to 35 degrees, allowing it to engage helicopters as they bob above the treetops to launch their missiles. A carousel loader helps give the gun a rate of fire of up to 300 rounds a minute, meaning that a helicopter's speed is no defence. Accuracy at up to 4,000 yards is ensured by a laser rangefinder, and a passive night vision system even allows the crew to engage targets in almost pitch darkness. When firing at ground targets, the gun has two alternative rates of fire: 60 rounds a minute against enemy infantry or single shot against vehicles. The helicopter threat is also one which the British Army's Stormer armoured personnel carrier is well equipped to meet. It carries 8 ready-to-fire, high-velocity Starstreak anti-aircraft missiles, which can be launched singly or in salvos against multiple targets. Developed from the Scorpion light armoured reconnaissance vehicle, Stormer is a small, air-portable vehicle, but despite its size, can carry up to 12 fully equipped infantrymen. A diesel engine gives reliability and a top speed of 50 miles per hour, while a flotation screen can be quickly fitted to allow the vehicle to swim across rivers. The small turret can be fitted with a wide variety of weapons, from heavy machine guns through quick-firing cannon to a 90mm anti-tank gun, giving the mission flexibility required of all modern armoured infantry vehicles. As a result, Stormer has been ordered by several other countries in the Middle and Far East and has a long future ahead of it. While Stormer is designed principally to equip infantry regiments, the British Warrior mechanized combat vehicle usually accompanies the tanks and helicopters of armoured regiments into battle. Although basically an armoured personnel carrier, carrying a crew of 3 and 7 infantry, the Warrior is also designed to operate in the reconnaissance role, and the turret mounts the same 30mm quick-firing cannon as in the Scimitar light tank. Like the German Puma and Swedish CV90, this gives it the mission flexibility required in any modern military vehicle, and the Warrior has seen active service in both Iraq in 1991 and Kosovo in 1999. This shows its adaptability for all types of terrain and climate. Low ground pressure and the ability to climb 60-degree gradients give Warrior very good cross-country mobility, and a 500 horsepower engine provides a top speed of nearly 40 miles per hour. Reliability and endurance are among the vehicle's other strengths. Breakdowns are rare, and with a range of over 400 miles, the Warrior can stay on the battlefield for up to 48 hours without needing to refuel. The longest-serving and most widely exported armoured personnel carrier of all time is the United States M113. This first entered service in the early 1960s and, incredibly, is still in production. It has seen active service in Vietnam, the Arab, Israeli and Indo-Pakistani wars, and during the Gulf War in 1991, proving its all-round capabilities. The M113 was the first vehicle in the world to use aluminium armour to reduce weight, and it is fully amphibious, being propelled through rivers by its tracks at 4 miles per hour. The basic vehicle carries a crew of 2 plus 11 infantry who enter and leave through the rear on a powered ramp. Armament is normally a 50 caliber heavy machine gun, although there are almost endless alternatives for the 40 nations worldwide which have selected the M113 over the years. The latest version is the Model A3, which first entered US Army and Marine Corps service in 1987. This has a more powerful turbocharged diesel engine and fully automatic transmission, which allows it to be driven just like a car with a steering wheel and foot brake rather than the traditional push-pull steering and braking levers to each set of tracks. This makes the vehicle more manoeuvrable, able to twist and turn quickly to present a more difficult target, and top speed is nearly 40 miles per hour. Further reassurance is provided by bolt-on slabs of laminate armour, which can be fitted in moments and double the protection of the existing aluminium, which itself is nearly 2 inches thick in places. This applique armour can also be bolted to the floor plates to give extra protection against mines. The new engine and transmission system both help the M113 to brake or accelerate more quickly. This helps in moving into position and getting the infantry deployed as rapidly as possible. The armoured infantryman's basic mission has not changed over the years, of course, but what the M113 and other modern armoured personnel carriers do is help them fulfil their role with the maximum efficiency. This means getting them to the right place at the right time, and for this, reliability is essential. The modifications made to the M113A3 have literally halved the previous breakdown rate, which is a great reassurance to its crews. Battle experience has also proved that the vehicle's commander needed protection against small arms fire when operating the machine gun, so the A3 has a small open-top turret enclosing him. Despite its age, when you see it in action, the M113 is still a very impressive vehicle, and it is just as effective on a real battlefield as during an exercise.
To cover!
Even as the M113 was entering service in the 1960s, the United States Army had started a program to develop a separate mechanized infantry combat vehicle to complement it. Because the M113 was already proving more than satisfactory as an armored personnel carrier, designers were able to take their time deciding exactly what they wanted the new vehicle to do. They were also able to take advantage of technological developments as they became available, and in the end the M2 Bradley did not go into production for nearly 20 years, first entering service in 1981. The Bradley carries a crew of 3 and 6 infantry in the rear compartment, all of whom have firing ports for their individual weapons as well as periscopes, so that they can see where they are going. To give the infantry covering fire when they dismount down the hydraulic ramp at the rear, the Bradley's turret mounts a Hughes 25mm chain gun. This is fully stabilized, just like on a modern tank, so it can be fired accurately even when the Bradley is traveling at top speed of over 40 miles per hour. The gun can fire both armor-piercing and high-explosive incendiary rounds, both of which are fitted with tracers, so the gunner can see exactly where he is placing his shots. He also has passive night vision and thermal imaging systems for engaging targets in total darkness. To counter the menace of enemy helicopter tank busters, the chain gun can be elevated to 60 degrees and can fire up to 200 rounds a minute. And, since the Bradley is designed specifically to operate closely alongside the United States Army's M1 Abrams main battle tank, enemy tanks are a constant threat. To meet this challenge, the Bradley has 2 launchers for TOW wire-guided anti-tank missiles on the left-hand side of the turret, with 5 reloaded rounds carried in the crew compartment. All the operator has to do is keep the crosshairs in his sights centered, and the missile will automatically find its target. Although the 24-ton Bradley is not amphibious, flotation screens carried, collapsed around the top of the hull, can be erected in moments so rivers are not an obstacle. Crew protection is excellent. The turret is of steel and the hull of welded aluminium with an extra layer of spaced laminated armour. In addition, plates of reactive armour which explodes outwards when hit can be bolted on. This was used successfully during the war with Iraq in 1991. In action, the armoured infantry and their Bradleys are deployed alongside the tanks and supporting helicopter gunships and other tank-busting aircraft. One of their principal roles on the modern battlefield is to protect the tanks from enemy infantry with portable guided missiles. Once contact is established, the infantry exit down the hydraulic ramp at the rear and rapidly go to ground with their automatic weapons. The Bradley itself then moves off to find a hull-down position from where it can give covering fire, while at the same time presenting a very small target. Once the objective has been seized, the infantry return to their vehicle to resume the advance. One of the most impressive of all modern military vehicles is the US Marine Corps LVTP-7, designed and built specifically for the type of assault pioneered by the water buffalo in the 1940s. Amphibious assaults demand great flexibility both in their planning and execution, and the LVTP-7 provides exactly that. It can be transported aboard all types of United States Navy amphibious assault ships. The Marines enter through the small rear door, which forms an integral part of the hydraulic ramp. The LVT can carry 25 troops, plus its crew of 3. Powered by water jets, the LVTP, or Landing Vehicle Tracked Personnel, can achieve up to 8 miles per hour in the sea, and its bird-shaped hull allows it to surmount waves up to 10 feet high. An improved drainage system in recent models ensures that any water which does enter the vehicle is rapidly expelled through the bilge pumps. The air conditioning system provides cool, dry air for both the occupants and the engine. The commander's cupola is raised to give him better all-round vision and allow him to tell the troops what's going on around them. As the vehicle nears the shore, the driver switches from water jets to tracks, and the armoured amphibious assault vehicles mount the beach. They race ashore through the breakers without pause. The Marines on board remove their life jackets and check their weapons for the assault. Once dismounted, the men fan out rapidly, some dropping to give covering fire if needed. The remainder rush to scale the cliffs because speed and surprise are essential in the amphibious assault mission. The LVTs move off down the beach to find a path to the top. Not difficult for a vehicle which can scale a 60% slope with ease. If a vehicle does get stuck, help is at hand in the form of the LVTR recovery version. This is fitted with a powerful winch and a hydraulic crane, enabling it to take most battlefield casualties in its stride. This dedicated armoured engineer vehicle can also be used to change engine power packs. The third vehicle in the family is the LVTC, a specialized command and communications machine with extra radio equipment and plotting tables taking up the normal crew space. Once off the beach, the Marines run to remount their LVTs, which now serve as conventional armoured personnel carriers. In this exercise, they have the support of 2 friendly tanks.
Our mission is to attack and seize a lightly defended mortar in observation position. First squad, you'll attack the right half of the objective. Second squad, you'll attack the left half of the objective. All right, let's mount up.
The 400 horsepower Detroit diesel turbocharged engine makes light work of the roughest terrain. Hydrostatic steering provides full and immediate control at all speeds, while the easy-to-read instrument panel gives both visual and audible warning signals. The automatic transmission system makes the driver's task even easier. The improved powertrain gives a top speed of 40 miles per hour, while the suspension is designed to give a smooth ride and reduce crew fatigue. While moving up to the combat zone, the roof hatches can be opened to give the Marines some fresh air, as well as a 360-degree view all round the battlefield. When the enemy wakes up, those hatches can be closed very quickly as well. The LVT's welded aluminium armour, nearly 2 inches thick, provides protection against small arms fire as well as shrapnel from artillery and mortars. The vehicle can also hit back using the 50 caliber heavy machine gun mounted in the full traversing power-operated turret. Once the enemy has been located, The Marines prepare for action again.
30 seconds to the objective. Check your gear.
To shield itself from enemy fire, the LVT has both smoke generators run off the engine and 8 grenade dischargers to lay an instant smoke screen.
Objective, 50 meters at 12 o'clock. Let's go!
As the Marines spread out on the ground, the LVTs move around to give covering fire from the flanks. Then the tanks rumble forward to take out the enemy strongpoint. This exercise was a battle simulation, but in a real war zone the operation we have just seen could have taken 2 or 3 days using conventional infantry and landing craft, and would certainly have resulted in high casualties. But, this exercise over, the LVTs returned to the beach before sailing back to their mother ships. United States Marines have been involved in many real-life operations over recent years, notably on Grenada and in Lebanon in the 1960s. The men of the 1st and 2nd Marine Corps divisions, which formed part of the coalition forces ranged against Iraq in 1991, fully expected to use their LVTs in anger. However, the threat of an amphibious invasion was a feint designed to draw Saddam Hussein's Republican Guards away from where the main assault was planned to take place. However, the Marines provided invaluable backup during the liberation of Kuwait. The LVTs were accompanied by Marine Corps M60 tanks, as well as those from Saudi Arabia and Egypt. They encountered only sporadic resistance as they pushed into Kuwait and liberated the capital. The killing fields, in which Saddam Hussein had threatened that Allied troops would burn, proved no real obstacle. The Iraqi troops were totally demoralized by the weeks of aerial bombardment during Operation Desert Storm, and when the ground offensive, codenamed Desert Sabre, began, they offered little resistance. The armoured infantry, riding in their Bradley and Warrior mechanized fighting vehicles, swept through the minefields and ramparts which had been breached by combat engineers. The battle did not stop at night. Here, a helicopter gunship takes out an enemy command post. Its occupants probably didn't even know the aircraft was there. Tanks, such as the British Challenger, supported by multi-role helicopters like the Lynx, proved an irresistible combination in conjunction with the armoured infantry. There was no hiding place for the Iraqi forces. In fact, it was the technological advantage of passive night vision devices and thermal imaging for the gunners which proved decisive in the ground campaign. A veteran of the Allied forces which had stormed ashore in North Africa in 1942, riding their M3 half-tracks, could not have envisaged warfare conducted like this. The Allied advance was so rapid that Saddam's troops had no time to redeploy once they realized they'd been deceived by the threat of amphibious invasion, and that in fact the tanks and infantry were already deep inland behind them. As the Allied forces continued to harry them, with armoured infantry riding in their Warriors and Bradleys across the trackless sands, the Iraqi forces began to surrender in droves. When a pocket of resistance was encountered, the infantry's small arms, machine guns, portable anti-tank missiles and mortars simply overwhelmed it. And no Iraqi tank survived long. After only a week, the armoured infantry could proudly say, "Mission accomplished."